Day 6. 0800 hours to 1200 hours. Carlson returned to the Justice Police headquarters. The patrols around the perimeter seemed more nervous and aggressive. He had received a number of reports suggesting that the secret police were losing troops as, fearing the end was at hand, they were leaving their posts and returning to their families and homes. This would soon leave only the androids protecting the security state apparatus. And him. He had nowhere to go. The building was quiet. It seemed to be abandoned. He'd planned to storm up to General Kopion and demand to be told what the Justice Police were doing to prevent further bloodshed. But Kopion was not in his office. The vidscreen monitor on his desk was alive and chattering with images. He took a quick look. It appeared to be an old, two-dimensional film presentation. An old-fashioned, oil-driven military vehicle was speeding across a verdant green field. Is this how the head of the security police was passing his time? An amulet featuring a worm curled around a globe was also on the general's desk. He picked it up. It seemed an odd thing for the general to possess. His thoughts went back to his wife. He couldn't forget. The body thrown onto the ambulance, he clasped her hand, his skin had burnt, and he said goodbye. He didn't know why he had returned to police headquarters. Things didn't seem to matter anymore. He thought about the words in the book. Just words. He wanted his loved one. The mother of the first victim had slapped his face. He felt alone. He left the general's office and proceeded to the vaults, full of the secrets of the 7 planets. There were no android security guards to stop him. The door was locked. His staser would burn the lockout. A bolt of high energy ripped a hole in the door. He went into the room and walked past the rows of documentation too secret to be placed on computer disk. He didn't know what he was looking for. He had to blame someone. But who? This place had all the answers. He walked around, picking up files, looking at them, and then throwing them onto the floor. He grabbed hold of one case of files and pushed it over. "Halt!" a voice ordered. The major turned. 2 androids stood at the door, pointing their weapons in his direction. How had they known he was here? He looked at them, and then at the chaos of the vault. The room looked as if it had been torn apart. Had he done this? And then he heard the automatic alarms. The warning alert must have been sounding since he had broken into the room. What had he done? "Throw down your weapons or I shoot," shouted one of the androids. He put his hands into the air. Kopion sat at his desk looking at the major. The androids had pulled the shaking and distraught officer from the wreck of the room and taken him directly to their controller. Kopion looked faintly bemused. He dismissed the androids and turned to face Carlson. "I don't know why I did it," Carlson said. And he didn't. Kopion poured him a drink of wine and offered him a date. "No, I don't want them," he replied abruptly. Kopion chewed a date and filled his glass of wine with mineral water. "Why don't you do something? Why can't you stop it?" Carlson realized he was shouting. "Make it go away?" the general asked. "Yes." Carlson tried to steady himself. "How?" "I don't know. Have you been out there? They're slaughtering each other. I've come from the market." He paused. He didn't know how much to say. "There are bodies stacked up where the Air Force, for some godforsaken reason, launched an attack with chemical weapons on a civilian crowd." "They called it a mob," Kopion reported. "What's going on?" the major asked. "Why is there death? Why did she have to die?" "I've checked all the recent reports from our agents. And do you know what I found out?" "Nothing," Kopion said. "You found out only what you already knew. We're keeping an eye on gangsters, black marketeers, and revolutionaries. You found out that we're monitoring the ranks of the military, academicians, and priests. We have produced thousands of pages of reports, all of which say absolutely nothing." "Yes." The Major stared at his superior officer. "It's just madness out there," said Copy Ion. "Stop it then. Please stop it. Make it go away." "I can't." Copy Ion fell silent. "I want to reopen the investigation into the ritualistic murders. You said there were drugs involved. Someone must have killed Brown and the antique dealer." "These murders again." "Yes! I think there's a connection with what's happening on Nicaea." "Such as?" Copy Ion asked. "There is an answer. There must be an answer. There's a plot, a highly organized attempt to overthrow the government by a select group of the elite," said Carlson. "The investigations so far have shown no evidence of such an elaborate organization." Copy Ion seemed to answer before he had finished. But the commander was not dismissing his views. His eyes seemed to be trying to assess how much he knew. Perhaps Carlson was becoming paranoid. A lot had happened. "The reports are bland and could have been doctored." "A conspiracy theory," said Copy Ion. "No, more than that," Carlson replied. "What are you suggesting, then?" Copy Ion asked. "That all these events are linked. The priests are saying this is the predicted last battle across the face of the universe when every man must choose," the Major looked intently at Copy Ion, "between good and evil." "I do believe there is a great design, and that good and evil are inextricably linked in a metaphysical battle across space and time. I also believe that people are capable of bad, sick, and harmful actions." "Then what do you see as causing the chaos on this planet?" "What do you see?" Copy Ion asked, picking up the amulet. He ran the chain through his hand. "Armageddon is the only explanation," Carlson shouted. He didn't know if he meant it, but there had to be a word, an explanation. He had lost everything he had loved. He couldn't be powerless. He had to do something for her. Anything. "Let me reopen the murder inquiry," the Major begged. "No." The Major left the room, punching the wall. He was angry. His fist was bruised, but he punched the wall again. He could feel a knot in his stomach twisting, creating a painful stabbing feeling in his guts. He found it so difficult to concentrate. He had to do something. The murders were the key to unraveling the chaos on the planet. Why couldn't the General appreciate that? It was so simple. He was going to wait in the corridor until Copy Ion came out, and he would confront him. Until then, he would just blend in with the walls. Bernice continued to walk through the endless corridors. The space station was an empty hulk. Most of the craft had been cannibalized and ripped apart. There were no clues to its original purpose. The remains of the machinery indicated a technology far in advance of Earth. What had happened to the once mighty race which had built this superior piece of engineering? Her thoughts drifted back to Spike, the metal man, who had been killed less than an hour ago. She felt ashamed that she had left him and made her own escape. She had enjoyed travelling down the river with him. She remembered her parents, lost long ago. All she had were her memories. And then she stopped. She heard a sound, a door being pulled open. Whispers, two people talking. Damn! The other androids. She had forgotten about them, but they were still after her. She couldn't identify the direction of the sounds. The sounds echoed around the station, but the other life forms could be anywhere in the myriad of corridors. She stood still. Where was she going to go? Even if she left the station, there was nowhere to go. The shape changes were not going to offer her any protection. She was so tired. She desperately needed sleep. They would never find her if she crawled into a cupboard and hid away. She could sleep for 1,000 years. As she looked for a hiding place, she could hear the voices increasing in volume. She caught a few words. Marsh, explosion, death. Nothing that enlightened her. She had to escape from here. They were too close. She tried to walk faster. She was too tired. Her muscles ached. She realized that she wasn't walking in a straight line and was unsteady on her feet. She began to run and fell over. Come on, she said to herself. Bernice, this isn't a good idea. You've got to move. The voices were close behind her. She had to move just a little further. With all her strength, she forced herself to stand and threw herself around the corner. She ran headlong into a woman. The woman fell over, and Bernice collapsed on top of the struggling body. An android stood over her. If this was death, then she would stare it in the face. Although she had run out of steam and no longer cared whether she lived or died, there was no way she was going to give up. With all her energy, she clenched her fists and drove them between the android's legs. It hurt her arms, but had no effect on the android. He picked her up and threw her a few meters down the corridor. It's just me and you, she said to herself. The android was ignoring her, talking to the woman. He was asking if the woman was all right. He then turned his attention to her, lumbering over. He was about 2.5 meters tall, naked muscular chest, and short dark hair. He was dragging a damaged left leg. Hey, I'm not a shape changer, I'm not, she shouted. Perhaps the louder she shouted, the more he would believe her. He stopped. Kill me, but I'm not who you're looking for. This banned world is crowded with unwelcome visitors, he said. The android appeared to accept that she wasn't his target. Bernice told him that she and her friend, the doctor, had crash-landed on the planet. The doctor had disappeared. She and Spike journeyed down the river until they arrived at the space station. Spike had been killed in an attack by one of the shape-changers. Spike survived? The android asked. Until the attack, she replied. Now I know I'm alone, he continued. She discovered Thomas was one of the androids who had tried to kill her earlier, and the woman was the wife of a scientist sent to the planet to analyze the water. She listened to their stories of a red paralysis slowly expanding over the planet. The weed seemed to stop time within its boundaries. She was also told that some of the creatures and vegetation on the planet were not real, but the product of a Nicean corporation. The woman didn't seem interested in meeting her. She seemed a little jealous. Bernice could understand that. She had felt possessive of Spike's help and company. Elle wasn't unfriendly to Bernice. Elle talked to her and offered her support, but with it there was a feeling of coldness. Thomas and Elle seemed to make a good couple. Both of them rarely talked. She wanted to go back home, and he wanted to fulfill his mission and destroy the shape changes. He was similar to Spike in build and single-mindedness. Bernice was tired. She wanted a rest and some hot food. Thomas needed to catch up with the shape changer. There was no time for respite from the task at hand. She followed the android outside. Elle was talking about life on Nicea, the vid-screen soaps, her simple typing job, and her small apartment. Bernice looked her over, a pale-looking creature. Although Bernice could understand her wish for peace and quiet, Elle must be joking, saying that she would prefer to be back home. Thomas was eager to continue to the castle, where the one remaining shape-changer could be found, and his mission completed. Bernice's escape from the planet was looking less likely. She looked again across the plain. A red glow was rising from the marsh. Night had also started to fall. She thought about the TARDIS. Would the red weed affect the time machine? Even if it didn't, how would she get back to the ship? I need to find the doctor, Bernice said. She had been thinking more about her companion since the death of Spike. It looks so beautiful, said Elle. But that beauty is death, replied Thomas. They all looked at the spreading crystal world. Suddenly, Thomas pointed up to the sky. We've got visitors. Bernice saw creatures flying in the sky about 2 kilometers away. They seemed to be dropping hundreds of meters, unfolding their wings, then rising with the air currents into the upper atmosphere. They made a sound like hysterical laughter as they played their games. 10 of them had landed on the burnt-out branches of the witch trees and were silhouetted against a fiery red death. They looked like demons from medieval Earth folklore. "What are they?" Bernice asked. "Hunters," Elle replied. "Right," Bernice said, remembering what Spike had told her about them. "We've got to get out of here," Thomas said firmly. He began to move off towards the castle. Bernice could see 30 or 40 of the hunters hovering in the skies. They seemed to be amassing in the heavens. Yes. She turned to find her companions had already begun the final march to the castle. She ran after them. "Hold on!" The Major followed Copyion into the radio communications room. As the Major entered, a lone police officer stood to attention. Carlson felt it unnecessary to return the customary military salute. He was trying to grasp the events going on around him. Copyion, appearing not to notice him, continued collecting messages, reading through them quickly, and then shredding them. The Major felt there was too much going on in his head. The images of the dead bodies in the streets kept taking over his mind and seeping into his everyday thoughts. He didn't feel like eating, and even breathing had become a painful labour. He found his body shaking again. He had considered that he was having a heart attack. That would explain the pains in his side and the hot and cold sweats tormenting him. The chatter of the machines was increasing. The sounds were becoming uncomfortable. "Sir," he said to the general. Copyion stared at him. "I think you should go home," said Copyion. "What's happening?" He felt so powerless. "The priests have ordered all their followers to pray for the Prime Mover's eternal mercy. A couple of hunters were captured and torn apart by the hysterical mob. Many people were killed. In a frenzy, followers ran along the streets, screaming, shouting, attacking anyone. These are the final days." "I didn't think you believed," Carlson said. He slumped onto the floor, curling into a ball. Copyion stepped around him. "It is time." "What are you going to do?" Carlson asked. "A long time ago I lost this arm." Copyion ran his hand against his left shoulder. "On the unnamed planet. Now I must return there. That's where the secret to all of this lies." "I don't understand," said Carlson. "No," Copyion replied, returning to his office. The castle was bathed in a flickering light. The core of the missile had been strapped into place. The mining equipment had powered up and was descending into the depths of the shaft. 63%, Chopra said, reading out the machine dials. Swarf looked pleased and hobbled around the courtyard, laughing to himself. His plan was obviously to process enough drugs to flood all human-occupied space. But where was the source of the substances? Chopra thought of his training in the occult world, how his powers had been used by slave traders, who had murdered the rest of his family, and then by the Takar drug cartel. He had smoked simple compound narcotics to accept the veil of illusion, but had never experimented with the more complex chemical compounds. They did things to the mind. You felt you had entered new worlds and discovered all that it was necessary to know about life. It was all a deception by the form manipulator. The reality of things was hidden from ordinary folk like him. They were just pawns in the grand design. Swarf thought he knew, but he too was being controlled. The images of the bodies wrapped around each other in mud had stuck with the shape-changer all his life. Chopra had glimpsed into the mind and understood, an understanding which had only recently come to him as his body aged and his life force drained away. It was time, the one dimension that could not be controlled, the endless drift from the past to the future. The shape-changers had sought to control their lives with their willpower, able to transform their bodies into any form, but they were still prisoners of this mortal, finite universe. And then he could hear them calling again. Chopra had to keep his mind in order. There were too many things trying to break into his thoughts. The place was haunted. Chopra could sense ghosts drifting around the castle. Voices and wispy figures haunted this place. He could hear them in the rooms above. And the noises! Why had he to suffer them? They had waited. Not for him, for the other. The other. The hovercar sped through the capital. Most of the city was aflame, and bitter fighting had taken over the downtown suburbs. The Major looked out of the car. Riots and looting had destroyed most of the retail and industrial areas. Although there were occasional shots in the direction of the bulletproof car, the crowds ignored the Justice Police commander. Coulson was glad that he couldn't hear the sounds of the chaos. The images of the victims of the chemical attack stuck in his mind. How could people do that to one another? To his wife, Melanie. General Copyion was quiet. It had taken Coulson some time, but he believed that he had finally worked out who was responsible for the ritualistic murders on the planet. The answer had been staring him in the face. It was Copyion, his commander-in-chief, who had killed or ordered the deaths. This would explain why Copyion was not making any efforts to control the anarchy let loose across Nicaea. He was making an attempt to become the Archon. Copyion was going to leave the planet and return with Pandora's box, the ultimate weapon. He would order the androids to suppress all dissent and extinguish all opposition, and then return to become the supreme ruler of the Alphosian system. The Major had thought about it. He could throw his lot in with the Lords General and perhaps become a governor of one of the colony worlds. Or he could stop him. He had to stop him. The images of the dead came to his mind, and he knew that he had to stop Copyion. Democracy, for all its faults, should continue. That was the reason for the Declaration of Independence from the Earth Corporation. That was the reason he'd come out here. He held her hand. Goodbye. Coulson felt more reassured as they arrived at the hoverport. Androids saluted the car. They had taken the area from the rebels and were defending it on the orders of General Copyion. Copyion left the car and walked towards the space hoppers. Coulson said to the driver and the security guards that Copyion wished to be left alone. He walked on his own to his final destination. Copyion had tried to persuade him that he did not need to come to the hoverport. But Coulson was insistent. He had a job to do. He had no doubts that the androids would kill him once his crime had been discovered. He felt a tear in his eye. What had happened to his beloved world? What would happen to it in the future? He was the only one who could stop Copyion now. Perhaps he would be remembered for that. It didn't matter. He remembered his oath that he would serve. The hopper was apart from the others. There was something about it that seemed different, but he couldn't tell what it was. Copyion was kneeling as if in prayer. Copyion turned. He seemed calmed, almost as if he had been expecting his deputy's treachery. "I asked you not to come," Copyion said. "General," the Major said, "it was you. You committed the murders." Copyion looked at the stazer pointed at him and stood to face the Major. "It's been staring me in the face," Coulson continued. "You're ill. Put the weapon down," Copyion replied. "Don't come any closer," the Major shouted. Copyion continued to approach him. "I mean it! Stop!" As Copyion walked towards him, Coulson ordered him to stop, aimed his weapon, and fired it at the General's shoulder. The General flew backwards, with a look of shock on his face. He held his shoulder. "You killed all those people. Why?" Coulson asked. Copyion bounded forward and slammed his arm against Coulson's chest. The stazer fell. Copyion punched Coulson in the face and then in the stomach. The Major was winded. The old man had more power than the Major expected. The experience of war had not left him. Coppion dodged a fist and threw another punch at his solar plexus. The Major fell onto the ground. Coppion pulled out the old revolver stolen from the academician's apartment and moved over the fallen figure. The Major saw a coldness in the old man's face. He saw Coppion stand over him, pull back the safety mechanism of the revolver, and put the barrel directly over his forehead. "I'm sorry," said Coppion. He pulled the trigger.